Chosen one before this moment existed on your calendar, before July 16th and July 17th ever arrived. Something was already moving in your favor beyond the limits of what your eyes could see. You were never meant to discover this message by accident. There are thousands of voices speaking every second, thousands of distractions competing for your attention, yet somehow you are here, listening to these words at precisely the moment your spirit is ready to hear them. That is not coincidence. That is alignment, because there are rare moments when heaven does not simply observe your journey, it quietly intervenes in it. These next 48 hours carry that kind of energy. Most people will wake up believing these are just ordinary days. They'll continue repeating the same routines, making the same decisions, thinking the same thoughts, never realizing that the invisible architecture of their future has already begun shifting beneath their feet. But you, chosen one, you were never meant to sleep through this moment. Something inside you has been preparing for it long before your conscious mind understood why. Have you noticed it? That strange feeling that has refused to leave you over the last several days. The quiet distance growing between you and the version of yourself that once felt so familiar. The way certain conversations suddenly feel empty, even though the people speaking have not changed. The way your heart has become strangely selective about where it gives its attention. Even your silence feels different now. It no longer feels lonely. It feels intentional, almost sacred, as though your soul has been withdrawing from unnecessary noise because it knows something your mind is only beginning to understand. Do not mistake this feeling for confusion. Do not call it uncertainty. What you are experiencing is one of the oldest spiritual patterns described throughout history. Before destiny expands your outer life, it always restructures your inner world first. The universe never pours new wine into an old vessel. It first strengthens the vessel itself. That strengthening is happening inside you right now. You may not see dramatic evidence in your external reality yet, but beneath the surface, everything is quietly reorganizing itself with extraordinary precision. This is why the past week has felt so emotionally unusual. It wasn't random. It wasn't simply another emotional cycle. Every conversation, every unexpected memory, every delay, every unanswered question, every strange coincidence was slowly preparing your awareness for what begins between July 16th and July 17th. Nothing has been wasted. Even the disappointments that made no sense at the time have secretly been building the foundation beneath your next chapter. Think carefully about every door that closed before you were ready to let it go. Every opportunity that disappeared despite how desperately you tried to hold on to it. Every person who walked away before you understood their purpose. At the time, it felt personal. It felt unfair. It felt as though life itself had forgotten your prayers. But what if none of those endings were punishments? What if every closed door was quietly protecting a version of you that had not yet become strong enough to walk through the door that truly belonged to your destiny? This is one of the greatest spiritual mysteries hidden inside divine timing. God rarely explains his preparation while you are living through it. Understanding usually arrives after the waiting has already transformed you into someone capable of receiving what you once believed had been denied. July 16th quietly marks the moment when many people begin realizing that what looked like rejection was actually divine protection operating with a wisdom far beyond human understanding. Mercury continues its reflective journey, urging you to look beyond appearances, while the moon shifts from expressive fire into grounded practicality, asking one simple but life-changing question. Now that you know more about yourself, what kind of life are you finally willing to build? This is not merely astrology. It is spiritual psychology unfolding through divine timing. The heavens are not controlling your destiny. They are illuminating the season your soul has already entered. Seasons matter because every season asks something different from you. There are seasons for surviving. There are seasons for healing. There are seasons for learning difficult lessons. But there also comes a season when heaven quietly stops asking you to prepare and starts asking you to trust. Chosen one, that season is closer than you think. There is something else you need to understand, chosen one, because this is where most people unknowingly miss the very blessing they have been praying for. They spend years asking heaven for a sign, believing that when divine timing finally arrives, it will be obvious, dramatic, impossible to question. But divine timing almost never announces itself that way. It arrives quietly. It disguises itself as an ordinary decision, An unexpected conversation, a strange feeling you cannot explain, or a sudden loss of interest in something that once consumed your entire heart. Most people mistake those moments for confusion. Spiritually, they are often the first evidence that destiny has already begun moving beneath the surface. That is exactly why July 16th and July 17th deserve your complete attention. These are not simply 2 more days passing through the calendar. They represent the point where everything the universe has been preparing inside you begins asking to become visible outside you. Think about a seed buried beneath the earth. For weeks, nothing appears to happen. The ground looks exactly the same. Anyone looking from the outside would assume nothing is growing. Yet beneath the soil, an invisible miracle has already begun. Tiny roots push through darkness, searching for stability before a single leaf ever reaches the light. If someone judged the seed only by what they could see above the surface, they would believe it had failed. But heaven never measures growth by appearances. It measures growth by what is happening where human eyes cannot reach. Your life has been following that exact pattern. For months, perhaps even years, you have wondered why progress seemed so slow, why answers arrived so late, why certain prayers appeared to remain unanswered. But what if the greatest work was never happening around you? What if it was happening within you all along? Every disappointment strengthened your roots. Every delay deepened your faith. Every silent season forced you to discover parts of yourself that comfort never could have revealed. You thought life was standing still. In reality, your foundation was quietly becoming strong enough to support the future heaven had already prepared. That is why these next 48 hours carry such unusual spiritual weight. They are not asking you to become someone new. They are revealing the person you have already been slowly becoming through every battle you survived. And this revelation may surprise you because it rarely feels dramatic. It often arrives as peace, a deep, almost unfamiliar calm that quietly replaces months of emotional exhaustion. Suddenly, the things that once controlled your thoughts no longer carry the same power. The people whose approval once seemed so important begin fading into the background. Dreams that once felt impossible begin feeling strangely natural, as though they have always belonged to you. This is one of the clearest signs that your spirit has entered a different season. Your desires begin matching your destiny instead of your fears. Mercury's continued reflection during these days quietly supports this process. Instead of filling your mind with more questions, it begins removing unnecessary noise. It becomes easier to recognize which thoughts belong to your intuition and which ones belong to old fear. That difference changes everything. Fear always speaks urgently. It tells you that if you don't decide immediately, everything will fall apart. Intuition speaks differently. It never shouts. It never forces. It quietly waits because truth has no need to compete with confusion. Chosen one, listen carefully over these next 2 days. The loudest voice inside you may not be the wisest one. Sometimes the voice that barely whispers carries more truth than the one demanding all of your attention. And then something remarkable begins happening. As the moon settles into practical Virgo, inspiration quietly transforms into responsibility. Heaven gently shifts the question. It is no longer asking, "What have you learned?" It begins asking, "What are you willing to build with everything you've learned?" There is an enormous difference between those 2 questions. Knowledge changes your understanding. Action changes your destiny. This is why so many people remain trapped inside cycles they already understand. They know exactly what needs to change, yet they continue waiting for another sign instead of trusting the wisdom they already carry. But perhaps the sign they have been waiting for is not another coincidence. Perhaps the sign is the quiet realization that they no longer need one. Perhaps that is exactly what July 17th is trying to reveal. Not another message from heaven, but the discovery that heaven has already placed enough truth inside your heart for you to take the next faithful step. And once you do, you will begin to understand something extraordinary. The door you believed was locked was never waiting for another key. It was waiting for the moment you finally believed you were worthy enough to walk through it. Chosen one. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when heaven quietly steps back. Not because it has abandoned you, not because the miracles have stopped, but because everything that needed to be planted inside your spirit has already been planted. From that moment forward, the question is no longer whether God is speaking. The question becomes whether you have learned to recognize his voice without needing another sign. That is the deeper mystery unfolding between July 16th and July 17th. For weeks, perhaps even months, the universe has been arranging conversations, delays, unexpected endings, strange coincidences, and moments of uncomfortable silence around you. None of them were isolated events. They were pieces of a much larger design that your logical mind could never fully understand while you were living through it. Only now does the picture begin coming together. This is why so many chosen ones feel emotionally different during seasons like this. It is not because the world around them has suddenly changed. It is because their soul has quietly reached a level of awareness that no longer fits the life they have been trying to hold together. Have you noticed how certain dreams no longer excite you the way they once did? How some relationships seem to have lost their emotional gravity without anyone doing anything wrong? How even the things you once prayed desperately to keep now feel strangely distant? That feeling is not emotional instability. It is spiritual graduation. There are chapters your spirit can no longer live inside because the lessons hidden within them have already been learned. Staying would no longer create growth. It would only create repetition. And heaven has never called you toward repetition. It has always called you toward expansion. Expansion, however, comes with a cost that very few people are willing to pay. It asks you to leave behind certainty before the next destination becomes visible. Imagine Abraham leaving everything familiar without knowing exactly where the road would end. Imagine Moses standing before a sea that logic insisted could never open. Imagine David being anointed king while still living the ordinary life of a shepherd. Divine timing has never depended upon visible evidence. It has always depended upon trust. That same spiritual law quietly surrounds these next 2 days. July 16th is not asking you to understand your entire future. July 17th is not demanding that every unanswered question suddenly disappear. Instead, these days gently ask something much more difficult. Can you continue walking even when only the next step has been revealed? Because that is how heaven has always worked. It rarely illuminates the entire staircase. It simply provides enough light for the next faithful step. Then, once that step is taken, another piece of the path quietly appears. This is why fear becomes so loud during seasons of genuine transformation. Fear cannot survive certainty, so it tries to convince you that uncertainty itself is danger. It whispers that if you cannot see the final outcome, you should remain exactly where you are. But your spirit knows something fear will never admit. Remaining inside a life you have already outgrown is far more dangerous than walking toward a future you cannot yet fully explain. During these next 48 hours, pay close attention to moments that seem almost too ordinary to matter. A sentence someone casually speaks, a memory that unexpectedly returns, a door that quietly closes without the dramatic explanation you thought you needed, a new idea that refuses to leave your mind no matter how many times you try to dismiss it. Heaven often hides extraordinary direction inside completely ordinary experiences because only those who have learned to slow down will recognize them. That is why the past several weeks have been preparing you through silence rather than spectacle. Silence sharpens spiritual hearing. When external noise begins disappearing, your inner knowing becomes impossible to ignore. Mercury's continued reflective energy supports exactly this kind of awareness, encouraging thoughtful observation instead of impulsive reaction, while the moon's movement into practical Virgo reminds you that genuine faith eventually becomes visible through consistent action, not simply beautiful intention. You are no longer being asked to wait endlessly for the perfect moment. You are being invited to honor the moment that has already quietly arrived. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle hidden inside July 16th and July 17th. Not that heaven suddenly begins speaking more loudly, but that your heart has finally become quiet enough to hear what it has been saying all along. Chosen one, if you have stayed with this message until now, then perhaps your soul already recognizes something your mind is still trying to explain. Because people who are not meant to hear a message like this rarely remain long enough for its deeper meaning to reach them. They become distracted. They lose interest. They move on. But you are still here. And that alone says something extraordinary about the season you have entered. There is a reason your spirit refused to look away. There is a reason these words continued pulling your attention back. It is because somewhere deep within you, a quiet recognition has already begun. You have been standing at the edge of a new chapter longer than you realize. The only thing that remained uncertain was whether you would finally trust yourself enough to step across the threshold. July 16th and July 17th quietly become that threshold.